The rain fell in thick sheets over Manhattan that November evening, turning the city into a blur of headlights and wet pavement. Elena Reyes stood at the edge of the sidewalk outside the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, her modest black dress clinging to her frame as the cold wind whipped through her dark hair. She clutched her small purse against her chest, watching the parade of luxury vehicles pulling up to the entrance, depositing guests in designer gowns and tailored suits. She should not have been there. She knew that. But when her best friend Maria had insisted she come to the charity gala as her plus one, Eleanor had allowed herself to believe, just for one night, that she could belong in a world so different from her own. Eleanor had grown up in a small apartment in the Bronx, the daughter of immigrants who worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. Her father had driven a taxi for 30 years until his hands could no longer grip the wheel. Her mother had cleaned offices in buildings just like this one, buildings where people looked through her as if she were invisible. Elena had fought her way through community college, working as a waitress at night and studying during every spare moment. Now, at 28, she worked as a nurse at a public hospital, earning just enough to help her aging parents and keep a tiny studio apartment in Queens. But tonight, Maria had convinced her to step outside her world. Maria, who had married well and now moved in circles, Eleanor, could only observe from a distance. Maria, who had promised that no one would know, that Eleanor would blend in, that it would be fun. Eleanor took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. The doorman glanced at her dress, a simple piece she had found at a thrift store, and carefully altered to look more elegant. For a moment his eyes lingered on her worn shoes, the ones she had tried to polish until they shone, but which still betrayed their age. He said nothing, simply nodded, and opened the door. The ballroom took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with scenes of angels and clouds. Tables draped in white silk held centerpieces of white roses and flickering candles. Everywhere she looked, there was wealth, confidence, and a kind of ease that came from never having known want. Elena found Maria near the bar, radiant in a red gown that probably cost more than 3 months of Elena's salary. Maria embraced her warmly, pressing a glass of champagne into her hand. They spent the first hour together, Maria introducing Eleanor vaguely as a friend without mentioning her profession or her neighborhood. Eleanor listened more than she spoke, nodding politely at conversations about summer houses in the Hamptons, winter trips to Aspen, and children in private schools that cost more annually than a luxury car. Then Maria was pulled away by her husband, a man with slicked back hair and a perpetual frown, leaving Elena alone near a pillar, watching the crowd swirl around her. That was when she heard them. 3 women stood in a circle just a few feet away, their voices carrying clearly despite the ambient noise. One of them, a blonde in a silver dress dripping with diamonds, was looking directly at Eleanor. "I heard she is the friend Maria keeps from her old neighborhood," the blonde said, her lips curling into a smirk. "The one who works in some public hospital. Can you imagine?" The second woman, a brunette with sharp features, laughed softly. "You can tell, just by looking at her. That dress is clearly second-hand. And those shoes. Did she walk here from the subway?" The third woman, older and more restrained, shook her head slightly but did not defend Elena. "It is kind of Maria to try to help, I suppose, but some people simply do not belong in certain places." Elena felt her face burn. Her hands trembled around the champagne glass. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor, to never have come. The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit, not because they were cruel, but because part of her had always feared they were true. She turned to leave, her eyes blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She would find the nearest exit, slip out quietly, and never speak of this night again. But in her haste, she collided with something solid, someone solid. The champagne glass flew from her hand, shattering against the floor in a spray of crystal and liquid. Elena stumbled backward, her heel catching on the hem of her dress, and she would have fallen completely if 2 strong hands had not caught her by the arms. She looked up into the face of a stranger. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back from a face that seemed carved from stone. His jaw was sharp, his cheekbones pronounced, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray and cold and impossibly deep. He wore a black suit that fit him like a second skin, clearly custom-made, and a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than everything Elena had ever owned combined. But it was not his appearance that made her breath catch. It was the way everyone around them had gone suddenly, completely silent. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, carrying an accent she could not quite place. Elena shook her head, too stunned to speak. She became aware of the broken glass at their feet, the champagne staining the edge of his perfectly polished shoes, and mortification flooded through her. "I am so sorry," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was not looking where I was going. Your shoes, I have ruined them. I will pay for them. I can find a way to—" She stopped, realizing how absurd that sounded. She could not afford a single button from his suit, let alone replace designer footwear. But the stranger did not look at his shoes. He did not look at the mess on the floor. He looked only at her, his grey eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and somehow, strangely, seen. "The shoes are meaningless," he said simply. Before Eleanor could respond, a sharp voice cut through the moment. "Well, well," the blonde woman said, stepping closer, her smirk now triumphant. "I see our little party crasher has made quite an impression." She turned to the stranger, her expression shifting to something more calculated. "Mr. Romano, I am so terribly sorry about this. Clearly some people do not understand proper behavior in such settings. She really should not be here at all, you—" "No, she is just some nurse from the Bronx that Maria dragged in out of pity." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor felt the words like physical blows. She wanted to run, to hide, to be anywhere but here. But then something happened that she would never forget. The stranger, Mr. Romano, turned to face the blonde woman. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened, becoming cold in a way that seemed to drop the temperature of the entire room. "You know my name," he said quietly. "Do you also know what I do to people who disrespect guests in my presence?" The blonde woman's smirk faltered. "Guests? But she is not—" "She is with me," Mr. Romano said, and though he did not raise his voice, the words carried absolute authority. Every person within earshot seemed to take an unconscious step backward. The blonde woman went pale, her diamonds suddenly seeming cheap against the fear in her eyes. Mr. Romano turned back to Elena, and for a moment, the coldness in his gaze softened imperceptibly. "Would you care to join me for some air?" he asked. "It seems this room has become insufferable." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She did not know who this man was, did not understand why everyone seemed to fear him, did not comprehend why he was defending her. But in that moment she would have followed him anywhere just to escape the humiliation behind her. He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the strength beneath the fine fabric of his sleeve. Together, they walked through the crowd which parted before them like the sea before a ship. Elena could feel every eye on her, but the stares no longer felt like mockery. They felt like something else entirely. They stepped out onto a private terrace overlooking the city. The rain had softened to a mist, and Manhattan spread out before them in a tapestry of lights, each window a tiny story, each street a river of possibility. Eleanor finally found her voice. "Thank you," she said. "You did not have to do that. You do not even know me." Mr. Romano leaned against the railing, his profile sharp against the glow of the city. "I know enough," he said. "I know that the woman in silver has built her entire identity on inherited wealth she did nothing to earn. I know that her husband is 3 months away from bankruptcy because of a gambling problem he hides from everyone. And I know that she mocks others because she is terrified that someone might one day mock her." He turned to face Elena, and in the dim light, his features seemed less severe, more human. "But you," he continued, "you walked into a room full of predators wearing nothing but your dignity. You did not cower, did not apologize for who you are. That takes more courage than anyone in that ballroom has ever shown." Eleanor felt something shift inside her, something she could not name. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and produced a small card, pressing it into her palm. "My name is Dominic Romano," he said, "and I suspect our paths were meant to cross." Eleanor looked down at the card. It bore only his name and a phone number, no title, no company, nothing to explain why an entire room of wealthy, powerful people had looked at him with such undisguised fear. When she looked up again, he was watching her with those storm-grey eyes. "The world you saw tonight," he said, "the cruelty, the judgment, the shallow games of status, that is their world. It does not have to be yours. But if you ever find yourself in need of an ally, someone who understands what it means to be underestimated, call that number." Before Elena could respond, the terrace doors opened, and Maria rushed out, her face pale with worry. "Elena, I have been looking everywhere for you. I'm so sorry about what happened. I heard everything. Those women are terrible. I should never have left you alone." Maria stopped abruptly, finally noticing the man standing beside her friend. Her face went from worried to shocked, to something that looked almost like fear. "Mr. Romano," she said, her voice suddenly breathless, "I did not realize you were attending tonight." Dominic inclined his head slightly. "Your friend needed air," he said simply. "I provided an escape." He looked at Elena one more time. "Remember what I said?" And then he was gone, disappearing back into the ballroom, leaving Maria staring after him with an expression that Elena could not read. "Elena," Maria whispered urgently, pulling her friend to the far corner of the terrace. "Do you have any idea who that was?" Elena looked down at the card still in her hand. "He told me his name. Dominic Romano." Maria's grip on her arm tightened. "He is one of the most powerful men in New York," Maria said, her voice dropping even lower. "His family has connections everywhere, business, politics, everything. There are rumors, Elena, dangerous rumors. Some say the Romanos have ties to organized crime, that Dominic controls half the city from the shadows. No one crosses him. No one." Elena felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the November air. She should have been afraid. She should have wanted to tear up the card and forget this night ever happened. But instead, she slipped the card into her purse and said nothing. As she rode the subway home that night, alone in a car that smelled of rain and weariness, Elena could not stop thinking about those storm-grey eyes, about the way he had looked at her as though she mattered, about the courage he had seen in her that she had never seen in herself. She did not know then that her life was about to change completely. She did not know that the man on the terrace was indeed what the rumors claimed, a leader of a criminal empire that stretched from the docks of New York to boardrooms across the country. She did not know that by defending her, he had marked her, set her apart, made her visible to both those who served him and those who wished him harm. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone powerful had chosen to protect her, and some part of her, some small, quiet, desperate part, wanted to understand why. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this one, where destiny finds the unexpected ones, where courage rises from the ashes of humiliation, happen here every week. If you want to be part of this journey, to feel these emotions and live these transformations alongside us, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. 3 weeks passed. Elena tried to return to her normal life, to the rhythm of double shifts at the hospital, of cramped subway rides, of instant coffee and exhaustion. But something had changed. The card sat in her bedside drawer, and every night before sleep she found herself looking at it, tracing the embossed letters of his name. She told herself she would not call. What could she possibly say? "Thank you for defending me at a party where I did not belong. I cannot stop thinking about your eyes." It was absurd. He was a stranger, a wealthy, dangerous stranger who had shown her kindness for reasons she could not fathom. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Elena was leaving the hospital after a particularly difficult shift. A young mother had lost her newborn to complications no one could have predicted. Eleanor had held the woman's hand for hours, had absorbed her grief, because that was what nurses did, what she did, what she had always done. Now she walked through the parking garage toward the bus stop, her heart heavy, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She did not notice the men until they blocked her path. There were 3 of them, large and menacing, their faces hidden beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The tallest one smiled, revealing a gold tooth that caught the light. "Elena Reyes," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Someone wants to have a conversation with you." Elena's training kicked in. She reached for her phone, but one of the men was faster, knocking it from her hand and sending it skittering across the pavement. "There is nothing to be afraid of," the tall one said, taking a step closer. "We just need you to come with us. Our employer has questions about a certain man you met 3 weeks ago, Dominic Romano." The realization hit Elena like cold water. This was about him. Whatever world he inhabited, whatever rumors surrounded his name, that world had now reached out to touch her. "I do not know anything," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I met him once at a party, that is all." The tall man shrugged. "That is for our employer to decide." He reached for her arm, and Elena reacted on instinct. She drove her elbow backward, connecting with soft tissue, then ran. She made it 10 steps before one of them caught her, slamming her against a pillar with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded through her shoulder, and she cried. "Out." "That was not polite," the tall man said, approaching slowly. "Now you have made this more difficult than it needed to be." Elena closed her eyes, preparing for what came next. But what came next was not what anyone expected. There was a sound, like the crack of a whip, followed by a strangled cry. Elena opened her eyes to see the man who had been holding her crumple to the ground. Behind him stood a figure in black, moving with lethal efficiency. More sounds, more falling bodies. It happened, so fast that Elena could barely track the motion. Within seconds, all 3 attackers were on the ground, unconscious or groaning in pain. And standing among them, barely breathing hard, was Dominic Romano. He was dressed differently than at the gala, in dark jeans and a leather jacket, but his eyes were the same, storm grey and intense. He looked at the fallen men with an expression of cold contempt, then turned that gaze to Elena. "Are you hurt?" he asked. It was the same question he had asked, the first time they met. Elena realized she was trembling, adrenaline and shock coursing through her system. "My shoulder," she managed. "They pushed me against the pillar." Dominic's jaw tightened. He reached for her carefully, examining her shoulder with surprisingly gentle hands. "Nothing broken," he said, "but you will have bruises. Can you walk?" Elena nodded. "Good. We need to leave before more of them arrive." "More of them?" Elena's voice cracked. "Who are these people? What do they want with me?" Dominic was already guiding her toward a black SUV parked at the entrance to the garage. "Questions later," he said. "Safety first." 2 men in suits appeared from the SUV, moving toward the fallen attackers with zip ties and grim expressions. Dominic opened the passenger door for Elena. She hesitated. "I do not know you," she said. "I do not know anything about you except rumors. For all I know, you are more dangerous than they are." Dominic met her eyes steadily. "You are right," he said. "You do not know me, but I give you my word that I will not harm you. I will explain everything, answer every question. But right now, in this moment, those men work for someone who wants to use you to get to me. They will not stop. If you stay here, if you go home, they will find you again." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "You saved my shoes from champagne," he said. "Consider this returning the favor." Despite everything, despite the fear and the pain and the absurdity of the situation, Elena felt the corner of her mouth twitch. She got in the car. The drive was silent except for the hum of the engine and the distant wail of sirens. Elena watched the city pass by through tinted windows, familiar streets becoming unfamiliar as they headed north, away from everything she knew. Finally, she spoke. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Dominic replied. "My family has properties that are not publicly known. You will stay there until we neutralize the threat." Neutralize the threat. The words were so clinical, so removed from the visceral terror she had just experienced. "Who were those men?" Elena asked. "Who do they work for?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. "His name is Vincent Castellano," he said finally. "He runs a rival organization. For years, there has been an uneasy peace between our families. But Vincent is ambitious. He sees weakness where there is none. He has been looking for leverage against me, any pressure point he can exploit. And he thinks I am that pressure point? Elena shook her head in disbelief. I am nobody, a nurse from the Bronx. We spoke for 5 minutes at a party. Vincent does not know that. Dominic's voice was flat. He only knows that I defended you publicly, that I gave you my personal card, that I made you visible. In his mind, that makes you significant, so this is your fault. The words came out sharper than Eleanor intended, but she did not take them back. Dominic accepted them without flinching. Yes, he said simply, it is my fault. I should have been more careful. I should have considered how my actions would be perceived. Instead, I acted on instinct, and now you are in danger because of it. Elena looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since getting in the car. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He was not being dismissive or defensive. He was being honest. Why did you defend me? She asked quietly. That night at the gala. You did not know me. You had no reason to care. Dominic did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost private. I was watching you before you spilled the champagne, he said. I saw you enter the ballroom. I saw the way you looked at everything, not with greed or envy, but with wonder. And then I saw those women corner you, saw their cruelty, saw the way you stood there and took it without breaking. He glanced at her briefly. I have spent my life surrounded by people who perform strength, he continued. They brag and threaten and posture, but you standing there in a borrowed dress with thrift store shoes, facing down their contempt with nothing but your dignity, that was real strength. I could not let it go unanswered. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes again, but for different reasons now. You could have just walked away, she said. You could have let me leave without making a scene. I could have, Dominic agreed, but then I would not be who I am. They arrived at the property as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. It was a house in Westchester, set back from the road behind high walls and iron gates. Not a mansion exactly, but substantial, elegant, surrounded by old trees whose bare branches reached toward the sky like prayers. You will be safe here, Dominic said as they pulled through the gates. The staff has been informed. You will have everything you need. For how long? Eleanor asked. Dominic did not answer. The house was warm and beautifully furnished, with hardwood floors and fireplaces in every room. A woman named Rosa, middle-aged with kind eyes, showed Eleanor to a guest suite on the second floor. There was a 4-poster bed, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and windows that overlooked a garden now dormant with winter. Mr. Romano said you should rest, Rosa said. I will bring you breakfast in a few hours. After Rosa left, Elena sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she had been a nurse on a night shift. Now she was in hiding, protected by a man who ruled a criminal empire, hunted by his enemies. She should call someone, Maria, her parents, the police. But Dominic had explained in the car that involving authorities would only make things worse, would put her family at risk, would force her into a spotlight she could not survive. His people, he said, would handle it. His people. As if he commanded an army. As if the rules that governed normal lives simply did not apply. Eleanor lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She was exhausted, but sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those men in the parking garage, felt the pillar against her back, heard the sound of violence that had saved her. When dawn fully broke over the garden, she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of storms and grey eyes and a world she had never asked to enter. Days passed in the Westchester house, each one blending into the next like watercolors running together on canvas. Eleanor found herself settling into a strange routine. Rosa brought her meals, simple and delicious cooking that reminded her of her mother's kitchen. Books appeared in her room, novels and poetry collections that someone had chosen with care. The garden, though winter bare, became her refuge, a place to walk and breathe and try to find peace. Dominic came and went. Sometimes she did not see him for days. Other times, she would find him in the library at odd hours, poring over documents or speaking quietly into his phone in a language she did not understand. When their paths crossed, their conversations were brief but strangely easy. He asked about her work at the hospital, and she found herself telling stories she had never shared with anyone. The elderly man who had proposed to her every day for 3 weeks because the dementia made him forget he had done it the day before. The teenage boy who had come in after a car accident and walked out months later, defying every prognosis. The small victories and crushing losses that made up a life in service to others. In turn, Dominic revealed fragments of himself. He had been educated in Europe, spoke 4 languages, and had inherited the family business at 22 when his father suffered a stroke. The business, he said carefully, had many dimensions. Some were legitimate investments, real estate, import companies. Others were less so. He never denied what he was. He never tried to make it sound noble or justified. He simply told her the truth and let her do with it what she would. One evening, about a week into her stay, Elena found him in the library staring at a chessboard. The pieces were carved from ivory and ebony, clearly antique, clearly worth more than her annual salary. "Do you play?" he asked without looking up. "My father taught me when I was young," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I have not played in years." "Then you should practice." He gestured to the board, and they played. Eleanor lost badly, but Dominic walked her through her mistakes without condescension, pointing out the patterns she had missed, the traps she had walked into. By the end of the game, she understood more about strategy than she had ever known. "Chess is about patience," Dominic said, resetting the board. "It is about seeing 10 moves ahead while your opponent sees only 3. Most people play reactively. They respond to what is happening instead of shaping what will happen." "Is that how you run your business?" Elena asked. Dominic met her eyes. "That is how I survive." Another week passed. Eleanor began to feel less like a prisoner and more like a guest. She helped Rosa in the kitchen, learning recipes for dishes she had never heard of. She found a neglected greenhouse on the property and spent hours coaxing life back into dormant plants. She read voraciously, working her way through the library's collection of classics and philosophy, and even some poetry. But mostly, she waited. The waiting was the hardest part. She had no idea what was happening in the outside world, no sense of whether the threat had passed or only grown worse. Dominic's people kept her informed in the vaguest terms. They were working on it. Progress was being made. She would be notified when it was safe. And then on the 15th day, everything changed. Elena was in the greenhouse when she heard shouting, male voices, urgent and angry, coming from the main house. She dropped her gardening tools and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. She found chaos. Men in tactical gear moving through the hallways, Rosa huddled in a corner, her face pale, and Dominic standing in the center of it all, issuing orders with the calm precision of a general commanding troops. "What happened?" Elena demanded, pushing through to reach him. Dominic turned to her, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, she realized. Fear for her. "Vincent made a move," he said. "He got past the outer perimeter. We stopped him. But he is escalating. This house is no longer safe. Then where do we go?" Dominic took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her since the night in the parking garage, and she felt the warmth of his palm like a jolt of electricity. "There is a place," he said, "somewhere even Vincent cannot reach. But to get there, we have to move now." The next hour was a blur of motion. Elena was bundled into another black SUV, this one armored, with bulletproof glass and reinforced doors. Dominic sat beside her, weapons she had not known he carried now visible in a holster at his side. A convoy of vehicles surrounded them, and they raced through the night toward an unknown destination. "This is insane," Elena said, her voice shaking. "This is absolutely insane. I am a nurse. I fix people. I do not run from bullets and hide in safe houses." Dominic looked at her steadily. "I know," he said, "and I am sorry. I am sorry that my world has touched yours. But I need you to trust me a little longer. Can you do that?" Elena thought about her options. She could demand to be let out. to return to her old life, to take her chances with Vincent's men. Or she could trust a man she barely knew, a man who commanded criminals, a man who had nonetheless protected her at every turn. "I'm not very good at trusting," she said. "Neither am I," Dominic replied. "But I am asking you anyway." Eleanor looked out the window at the dark highway stretching ahead. "Then I guess we will learn together," she said. They drove for hours, eventually leaving the highways for rural roads, and then leaving the roads entirely for a dirt path that wound through dense forest. Dawn was breaking when they finally stopped at a compound that looked like it had been built to withstand a war. High walls, guard towers, heavy gates that swung open only after a series of codes and verifications. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Dominic said as they entered. "The most secure location in my entire network." Eleanor stepped out of the vehicle and looked around at the fortress that would be her new home. She thought about everything that had led her here, from the humiliation at the gala to the attack in the parking garage to the constant running and hiding. She thought about the life she had left behind, the patients who needed her, the parents who must be worried sick. And she thought about the man beside her, the feared Mafia boss who had shown her nothing but protection, who had asked for her trust like it was a precious thing, who looked at her now with an expression that seemed almost like hope. In that moment, standing at the threshold of the unknown, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something, an opening, a possibility. "Whatever happens next," she said quietly, "I want you to know that I am glad I met you, even with all of this." Dominic's eyes softened. "So am I," he said. And together they walked into the sanctuary. "Right now, I want to share something special with you. If this story has touched your heart, if you have felt Elena's fear and hope as if they were your own, leave a comment saying, 'Even in darkness I believe in unexpected light.' This is our way of connecting, of knowing that we are not alone in feeling these emotions. Take a moment and leave that comment now. I promise it will mean more than you know." The sanctuary was larger than Elena had expected, a compound of several buildings arranged around a central courtyard. There were living quarters, a medical facility that made her nurse's heart skip with appreciation, training grounds, and what appeared to be a small school. "A school?" she asked Dominic about it on their second day there, as they walked through the grounds in the thin winter sunlight. "Many of my people have families," he explained, "children who cannot attend regular schools for safety reasons. We provide education here, teachers, curriculum, everything they would have on the outside." Elena shook her head in wonder. "You have built an entire world." "I have built what was necessary," Dominic said, "but it is not the world I would have chosen." He stopped walking and turned to face her. There was something different in his expression now, a vulnerability she had not seen before. "I want you to understand something," he said. "I did not choose this life. It was chosen for me, by my father, by his father, before him. When I was young, I dreamed of being an architect. I wanted to design buildings that would stand for centuries, spaces, that would make people feel something beautiful. What happened? My father happened." He pointed to the compound around them. "This is my architecture now, walls instead of windows, fortresses instead of cathedrals." Eleanor felt her heart ache for him, for the boy who had dreamed of beauty and inherited violence instead. "It is not too late," she said. "People can change. Lives can change." Dominic smiled, but there was sadness in it. Some walls are harder to tear down than others. Over the following weeks, Elena found her place in the sanctuary. She began working in the medical facility, treating the minor injuries and ailments of the people who lived there. It felt good to be useful again, to practice the skills she had spent years developing, to help in tangible, immediate ways. She also got to know the community. There was Marco, the head of security, a giant of a man with gentle eyes who collected stamps in his spare time. There was Isabella, who ran the school with fierce dedication and had written 3 unpublished novels. There was young Sophia, the 12-year-old daughter of one of Dominic's lieutenants, who followed Elena around like a shadow, asking endless questions about the human body and what it meant to be a nurse. These were not the heartless criminals Elena had imagined. They were people, complicated and flawed, and trying to survive in a world that had offered them few choices. And then there was Dominic. They fell into a rhythm without planning it. Meals. Together when his schedule allowed. Evening walks through the compound. More chess games, though she was improving and the gap between them was narrowing. Conversations that stretched into the night, covering everything from philosophy to favorite foods to the memories they carried from childhood. Elena learned that Dominic had a sister who had died young, taken by illness when he was only 10. She learned that his mother had retreated into grief and never fully returned, becoming a ghost who haunted the upper floors of his childhood home. She learned that his father had been brutal not out of cruelty, but out of fear, terrified of appearing weak in a world that devoured weakness. In turn, she shared pieces of herself. The scholarship she had lost when she had to drop out to help her family. The engagement that had ended when her fiancé decided he wanted someone more ambitious, more polished, more likely to fit into his upward mobile plans. The loneliness that had become so familiar. She had forgotten it was not normal. "We are both survivors," Dominic said one night as they sat before the fire in his private study. "We have both learned to build walls because the alternative seemed impossible." Eleanor looked at him, at the firelight playing across his features, softening the hard edges she had first noticed at the gala. "Maybe we can learn to take them down," she said. He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, his grip gentle. "Maybe we can," he agreed. The first time, he kissed her. It was snowing. They were standing on the ramparts of the sanctuary, watching the flakes drift down from a sky the color of pearls. Elena had her arms wrapped around herself for warmth, but she was not cold, not really. She felt heated from the inside, aware of Dominic's presence beside her with every fiber of her being. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice barely audible above the whisper of snow. "About what? About what happens when this is over, when Vincent is no longer a threat, when you can return to your life." Elena turned to face him. The words she had been avoiding for weeks rose to her lips. "What if I do not want to return to my old life?" Dominic's eyes searched hers. "You cannot mean that." "Why not?" She stepped closer. "My old life was lonely. It was working until I collapsed, going home to an empty apartment, telling myself that I was fine when I was anything but. Here, I have purpose. I have community. I have—" She stopped, suddenly uncertain. "You have what?" Dominic asked softly. "I have you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying. Eleanor half expected him to pull away, to remind her of all the reasons this was impossible, of the dangers and complications and fundamental incompatibility of their worlds. Instead, he lifted his hand and touched her cheek, his fingers brushing away a snowflake that had landed there. "You have no idea," he said, "how long I have waited to hear you say that." And then he kissed her. Soft at first, tentative as if asking permission. She answered by pressing closer, by winding her arms around his neck, by letting herself fall into the moment she had been resisting since the night they met. The snow fell around them like a blessing, and for a few perfect minutes there was no danger, no enemies, no impossible circumstances. There was only this, only them. But perfect moments, Eleanor would learn, never lasted as long as they should. The attack came 3 days later. Eleanor was in the medical facility, treating a security guard for a sprained ankle when the sirens began to wail. The sound was unlike anything she had heard before, a rising and falling keen that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "Lockdown," the guard said, his face going pale. "That is the lockdown alarm. What do I do?" "Get to the safe room, central building, lowest level. Go now." Elena ran. The compound was in controlled chaos, people moving with purpose toward designated shelters, guards taking up defensive positions, the crack of gunfire beginning to echo from the perimeter. She was halfway to the central building when she saw Sophia. The girl was frozen in the middle of the courtyard, tears streaming down her face, looking around in panic for a familiar face. Eleanor did not hesitate. She sprinted toward the child, scooping her up in her arms and continuing toward the safe room. "I cannot find my papa," Sophia sobbed. "He was supposed to meet me after school, but he never came. He is probably at his post," Elena said, her breath coming hard. "He is keeping us safe. We need to get to the shelter." They were almost there when the explosion hit. The shockwave knocked Elena off her feet. She twisted as she fell, taking the impact on her shoulder to protect Sophia, pain lancing through her old injury. Dust and debris rained down. Her ears rang. For a moment, she could not see anything at all. Then hands were pulling her up, voices shouting, people running. She clutched Sophia to her chest and let herself be guided through the chaos, through a door and downstairs, and into a reinforced room deep beneath the earth. The safe room was full of people, women, children, the elderly, anyone who was not trained for combat. Rosa was there, organizing blankets and water. Isabella was gathering the school children into a corner, starting them on quiet songs to drown out the sounds from above. Eleanor found a place against the wall and held Sophia close, stroking her hair, whispering reassurances she was not sure she believed. Hours passed. The sounds of fighting grew louder, then softer, then louder again. At some point, someone brought updates. The perimeter had been breached. Casualties on both sides. Dominic was leading the defense personally. Dominic. Elena closed her eyes and prayed to whatever power might be listening. Not him. Please, not him. When the all-clear finally sounded, it was past midnight. Elena emerged from the safe room on shaking legs, Sophia still clinging to her hand. The compound was damaged but standing. Medical teams were already moving among the wounded. She found Dominic near the main gate. He was covered in dust, and what she very much feared was not entirely his own. Well, she did not want to think about it. He was issuing orders to his lieutenants, his voice hoarse but steady. When he saw her, something in his face crumpled. "You are safe," he said, crossing the distance between them and pulling her into his arms. "Thank God, you are safe." "Sophia," Elena managed. "I found her in the courtyard. She's okay." Dominic nodded, his arms still tight around her. "Her father took a hit, but he will recover. You saved his daughter's life. I did what anyone would do." "No." He pulled back to look at her face. "You did what you always do. You saw someone in need and you ran toward them, not away. That is who you are, Elena. That is why I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Why you what?" Elena asked softly. "That is why I love you." The words fell between them like stones, into still water. Elena felt her heart stop, then start again with a different rhythm, a faster beat that seemed to echo his name. "Dominic," she said. "You do not have to say it back." He shook his head. "This is not the time, I know, but I needed you to know. When the fighting started, all I could think was that I might never get to tell you, and I could not bear that." Elena reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble that had grown during the long night. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have loved you since the terrace, since you saw me when no one else did." They stood there in the aftermath of violence, holding each other, two people who had found something impossible in the most impossible of circumstances. Around them, the compound began to heal. Wounded were treated, damage was assessed. Life somehow continued, but both of them knew that this was only the beginning. Vincent would not stop. The attack had failed, but he would try again, and again, until one side or the other was destroyed. "We have to end this," Elena said, "permanently." Dominic nodded, his jaw setting with determination. "We will," he said. "I have a plan, but it requires something I never wanted to ask of you." Elena looked into his storm-grey eyes, the eyes of the man she loved, the feared Mafia boss who had shown her nothing but tenderness. "Ask," she said. The plan was dangerous. Elena understood that from the moment Dominic explained it. But it was also, she had, to admit brilliant. Vincent's weakness was his arrogance. He believed himself untouchable, smarter than everyone around him. He underestimated his enemies and overestimated his allies. And most importantly, he was obsessed with Elena, with the woman who had become Dominic's vulnerability. "If we give him what he wants," Dominic said, "we can control the when and where. We can turn his obsession into a trap. You want to use me as bait." It was not a question. Dominic flinched at the word, but he did not deny it. "I would never ask you to do this if there was another way," he said, "but every alternative leads to more fighting, more casualties, more years of looking over our shoulders. This ends it. Tonight." Elena thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The humiliation at the gala, the attack in the parking garage, the weeks of hiding, of waiting, of falling in love with a man she should have feared. She thought about Rosa and Marco and Isabella and little Sophia. She thought about the life she could have, the life they could all have, if this threat was finally neutralized. "Tell me the plan," she said. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, an abandoned warehouse in industrial Brooklyn. Vincent believed he was negotiating a surrender. Dominic had reached out through intermediaries, claiming that the attack on the sanctuary had broken his resources, that he was willing to trade Elena in exchange for peace. It was a lie, of course. The warehouse was far from neutral. Dominic's people had been preparing it for days, installing surveillance, mapping escape routes, positioning assets in strategic locations. When Vincent arrived expecting weakness, he would find strength. Elena's role was simple but terrifying. She would be the bait that drew Vincent into the open. She would stand in the center of the warehouse, seemingly alone, seemingly vulnerable, while Dominic and his people waited in the shadows. "If something goes wrong," Dominic said as they prepared to leave the sanctuary, "you run. You do not wait for me, you do not try to help. You get to the exit and you run. Do you understand?" Elena nodded, though they both knew she was lying. She would no more leave him than he would leave her. The drive to Brooklyn was silent. Eleanor sat in the back of the armored SUV, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. It looked different now than it had the night they met. The same buildings, the same streets, the same endless sprawl of humanity. But she was not the same woman who had taken the subway home from that gala, crying in an empty car, clutching a card she never thought she would use. She was stronger now. She had faced fear and found courage on the other side. She had loved and been loved in return. Whatever happened tonight, she would face it with her head held high. They arrived at the warehouse just before midnight. The building loomed against the dark sky, its windows broken, its walls tagged with graffiti. Itai looked abandoned, forgotten, exactly the kind of place where criminal deals were made. Eleanor stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the entrance. Her heels clicked against the broken pavement. The night was cold, but she did not feel it. All of her attention was focused on what lay ahead. Inside, the warehouse was vast and empty, illuminated only by the sickly glow of emergency lights that Dominic's people had rigged for the occasion. Elena walked to the center of the space and waited. She did not have to wait long. The doors at the far end of the warehouse opened, and Vincent Castellano entered, surrounded by his men. He was older than she had expected, silver-haired and distinguished-looking, with the kind of face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. "So," he said, approaching slowly, "this is the woman who brought Dominic Romano to his knees." He circled her like a predator sizing up prey. "I must admit I expected someone more impressive." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "I have learned that impressions can be deceiving." Vincent laughed. "Fire. I like that. Perhaps when this is over, we can find a more productive use for your spirit." The threat in his words was clear, but Elena did not flinch. She was not afraid. Not anymore. "You believe Dominic is defeated?" she said. "You believe you have won." "I believe what my eyes tell me." Vincent spread his arms to encompass the empty warehouse. "He comes to me on his knees, offering his woman in exchange for peace. That is the action of a desperate man." Or, Elena said quietly, "the action of a strategic one." The lights in the warehouse suddenly blazed to full brightness. Vincent's men shouted, raising weapons, but they were already surrounded. Dominic's people had emerged from hidden positions throughout the space, outnumbering Vincent's forces 3-1, and in the center of it all stood Dominic himself, walking toward them with the measured confidence of a man who had already won. "Vincent," he said, "did you really think I would surrender?" Vincent's face had gone pale, but he was not ready to give up. He reached for Eleanor, clearly intending to use her as a shield. He never got the chance. Eleanor had been waiting for this moment. She pivoted on her heel, driving her elbow into Vincent's solar plexus with all the force she had learned from the self-defense training Marco had given her. As he doubled over, she stepped away, clearing the path for Dominic's people. What followed was swift and efficient. Vincent's men were disarmed and restrained. Vincent himself was brought to his knees before Dominic, his silver hair disheveled, his distinguished facade crumbling into desperation. "You cannot do this," he hissed. "The other families will never accept it. You will start a war that destroys us all." Dominic shook his head. "The other families have already been consulted. They have agreed that your ambition has become a liability. You crossed too many lines, threatened too many innocents. Tonight is not the beginning of a war, Vincent. It is the end of one." He gestured to his lieutenants. "Take him. Make sure he never threatens anyone again." As Vincent was dragged away, still shouting threats that no one was listening to, Dominic turned to Elena. His grey eyes were soft, all the hardness that characterized his dealings with enemies melted away. "It is over," he said. "You are safe. We are all safe." Elena stepped into his arms, burying her face against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "What happens now?" she asked. Dominic pulled back to look at her face. "Now," he said, "we build something new, something better." 1 year later, Eleanor stood on the terrace of the penthouse that had become their home. The city spread out below her, the same city where she had once felt so small, so invisible, so unworthy of belonging. So much had changed. Dominic had kept his promise, restructuring his organization, moving away from the activities that had haunted his family for generations. It was not easy and it was not quick, but he was determined, and when Dominic Romano determined to do something, the world tended to get out of his way. Elena had returned to nursing, but differently now. She ran a chain of free clinics in underserved neighborhoods, funded by the Romano Foundation. Every day she treated patients who reminded her of her younger self, people who had been told they did not belong, that their origins defined their destiny. She proved them wrong, just as Dominic had proven her wrong. The door to the terrace opened and Dominic stepped out, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He moved to stand beside her, looking out at the view they now shared. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked. "Thinking about how far we have come." Elena accepted the coffee, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. "About who I was that night at the gala. About who I am now. Who are you now?" Elena smiled. "I am a woman who was mocked for her humble origins. I am a woman who was rescued by a stranger who turned out to be the feared Mafia boss. And I am a woman who discovered that the most unexpected person can see your worth when the rest of the world is blind to it." Dominic set down his coffee and took her hands in his. "What we have," he said, "what we have built together, it is more than I ever thought possible. You saved me, Elena, from the life I was born into, from the man I was becoming. You showed me that there is another way." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, the good kind, the kind that came from joy so deep it overflowed. "We saved each other," she said. Dominic reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Elena's heart stopped. "I have been waiting for the right moment," he said, "but I have realized there is no perfect moment. There is only now. There is only this. There is only us." He opened the box to reveal a ring, simple and elegant, a diamond that caught the morning light and scattered it into rainbows. "Elena Reyes," he said, "will you marry me?" Elena looked at the ring, at the man, at the life they had created from chaos and danger and unlikely love. She thought about the girl from the Bronx who had dreamed of mattering, who had wondered if she would ever be truly seen. That girl would not believe this moment. But Elena was no longer that girl. Yes, she said. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. They stood, there as the sun rose fully over the city, bathing everything in golden light. Some endings are really beginnings. Some storms lead to safe harbors, and sometimes the person who rescues you from the darkness is also the one who teaches you to find your own light. Eleanor had been mocked for her humble origins. She had been rescued by a stranger, and she had discovered that love, true love, does not care about where you come from. It only cares about where you are willing to go together. And, together, she and Dominic were ready for anything. If you have watched this far, it is because this story has touched something inside you. It is because you believe, as I do, that love can transform lives, that courage can overcome cruelty, and that every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are. Leave a comment saying I have watched this far so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. Your words mean everything to me. They tell me that these stories matter, that the hours of work are worth it, that we are building something beautiful together. Also, if this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every like, every share, every comment helps more people find these stories. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another journey like this one. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in love. Thank you for watching until the very end. Until next time, remember, your origins do not define you, your choices do, and you are worthy of a love that sees everything you are and chooses you anyway.